Yeah, hopefully you're having a bit of fun in the portal today, clicking around and enjoying yourself. The content we've got now for you, the session we're going to run today, I hope is going to be really, really useful and really insightful for all of you here who are either running your own hybrid events or thinking about doing it, thinking about dipping your toes in. There's been a lot of uncertainty in the industry in the last couple of weeks, especially with the lockdowns that have happened across Australia and the impact that's had on us as we've all started getting back to in-person events, which is really where we all want to get to. So what I thought we'd do today is introduce you to Julie McGraw from GEMS Event Management. Julie is one of the really leading lights in the virtual and hybrid space, and her team have really gone out and led the charge with the move towards virtual and hybrid over the last 18 months. So Julie, welcome.
Thanks, Thomas. How are you this morning?
Great, doing well. Thanks for joining us. So, Julie, if you don't mind, just give a bit of introduction of who you are and a little bit about GEMS.
Okay, so GEMS is a professional conference organiser based in Sydney. We have a small team. There are only 8 people in our team, and most of our work is done with associations and with probably about 20% of our clients being government clients. So we don't do corporate events. We mainly do conferencing and business events. And certainly our lives have totally changed over the last 18 months.
Yeah, absolutely. And GEMS have actually been a customer of ours using EventsAIR since 2016, I think.
Yes,
so you guys were all doing it all, ticking along nicely before COVID came along, running in-person events. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey from 2016 through to today?
Well, I suppose looking back at 2016, EventsAIR is such a beast that it did take us all a long time to get our heads around it. But once we had done that, we have really enjoyed the journey with EventsAIR. In that short time, there's been so many changes, but we never expected that what happened in early March last year was going to have such a profound impact on all of us. So the first couple of months, we actually didn't have, I think I'm probably in the same boat as most other PCOs, we didn't have a solution for our clients that had upcoming events. And I still think to this day it's remarkable that EventsAIR rolled out the very first beta version of OnAIR so quickly after we went into lockdown last year. I had come back from a conference in the States only a couple of weeks before we went into lockdown. And one of the lessons that I learned out of that was that you have to invest in your team. You have to invest in your business when things aren't going well. So when we all went into lockdown, when we lost, I suppose, 95% of our business in a 24-hour period, once I picked myself up off the floor, I started to think about those lessons that I'd learned at that conference, and I did a bit more reading. And with my business partner, we made a commitment. We've been doing this for a long time, and so we decided we were going to either go down fighting, or, well, actually there wasn't an option for us. We were going to go down fighting. So we decided that instead of doing what everybody else in the industry was doing and putting people onto JobKeeper and cutting back the hours, we decided not to do that. And instead, we got everyone trained. 2 of my team went through the original OnAIR bootcamp. They spent, I suppose the ops team at GEMS spent all of their time doing nothing but learning about virtual events, looking at how to edit videos and how to utilize the streaming platforms that were available to us. And then obviously we had the very first version of OnAIR. So 12 months later, a lockdown like we've seen in the last couple of weeks really is more an inconvenience than a threat. It's more the journey of converting clients over to the virtual platform. And so we do have an answer now. And so that investment, I think, in the staff, in giving them the time and the opportunity to really learn this platform, this new paradigm that we're all going to use going forward, was a worthwhile investment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of us early on, and it sounds like you were one of the few who weren't like this. I think when it all kind of happened, we all had no idea how long this was going to take, and no one had a crystal ball, but a lot of people tended to just bunker down until it all went away and we could get back to meeting in person again. And I think, time's really shown us that that's just not a good strategy. And I think, 18 months later, I don't think anyone back then looking forward would have seen us, being in this position still 18 months from now, still dealing with lockdowns and the implications that has. So it's fantastic to hear that you and your team were able to skill up and kind of dive in with all of that, because at the end of the day, it sounds like it's done really, really well for you guys. So you guys are now really skilled up with virtual and hybrid events. You're out there kicking goals. Tell us a little bit, how's business at the moment?
Business is great. What we're finding is that some of our international clients that we thought we would only do one event for have now come back to us to run events for them in a whole range of varying time zones. We've done, I think our first virtual event using OnAIR was actually an event where we ran it live out of London, and in Greenwich Mean Time +1. We recorded the 8 hours and then we rolled it out for another 16 hours over the rest of the time zones. So over 24 hours, we actually ran this conference 3 times and had live support going in our office the whole time. So it's given us a lot of opportunities to do things we never expected to do. And it's also allowed us to absolutely relook at everything that we do internally. And going forward, we're looking at some ways of now utilising the technology we have to the benefit of clients. We were on a call yesterday where a client said to us, could you basically do a registration type where someone can register for a random 10 different sessions? And that made us think about, that's actually possible. It may be complicated, but it is possible. So there's a whole new world out there for registrations and the way that we actually run our conferencing.
Yeah, and that's really interesting hearing you say that, because I think a lot of people have talked about how you can unlock new audiences with virtual events, but it sounds like you're actually unlocking new customers as a professional event planner, as a professional conference organizer. So you're mentioning overseas events that 18 to 24 months ago, just you would have been completely precluded from.
Well, yeah, we have a government client that we do work for them when they come to Australia, but it involves 20 different countries, and so their events move from country to country. And yet we did a job for them out of Bangladesh about 4 months ago, and there were some AV challenges, but with the team doing lots of rehearsals in advance, it worked really well. So we're looking at doing another one out of the subcontinent in the next couple of months.
Wow, that's fantastic to hear. And I think to any of the event planners in the room today who are running events on behalf of others, that's a really exciting kind of development, that you can expand your business that way. And for any of you who run events for your own customers, for your own attendees, that scope and that reach and that advantage that virtual gives you is really incredible. So Julie, you recently went through a bit of the kind of worst case scenario, nightmare scenario for event planners with one of your recent events, and a lockdown coming in right before it was due to kick off as an in-person event. Can you talk us through that?
Sure. So this was an event that predominantly was for Department of Education teachers from across Australia. And we had just on 1,400 people registered to go into the ICC on the 12th of July. We had 2.5 weeks before, we had no indication that we were going to go into lockdown. And what complicated this was that the teachers, this event is always held on the first day of the new term. So for the previous 2 weeks, typically we have no communication with our delegates because they're on school holidays. So probably it was the Friday that they were going on school holidays, and there was the likelihood that things could get a lot worse with the one case was starting to appear, and we knew that we had to make a really fast decision because we were going to lose our communication with the teachers. So we decided with the client at 1 o'clock that day to go virtual, which gave us 2 hours to actually communicate to our delegates. Over the next 2 weeks, we then had to convert the entire event to virtual. Now, we did lose some delegates who have had experience with virtual events, and a lot of them who cancelled indicated they hadn't had very positive experiences. But we also picked up another 100 delegates in the next 2 weeks. So what we lost, we more than gained. We then had the task of rehearsing everyone. So for anyone that hasn't really got involved in virtual events, I think the biggest change is rehearsal time. It's very different than when your speaker comes into the back of a ballroom and you quickly show them the mic, show them the setup, you take their PowerPoint presentation and they go off onto stage. Rehearsals do take a huge amount of time, and particularly if the demographic of your presenter is slightly older and perhaps they're not as tech savvy, we do find that we're having to do multiple rehearsals, which can spread that pre-event process out quite a bit. So we had 10 days to do this. Now, luckily, we had every intention, and we always use the EventsAIR app, the delegate app. So we'd already put a lot of the data into EventsAIR that was needed by the app, which then easily translated across to OnAIR. So we didn't have the luxury of having more than one rehearsal with some of our presenters. So we did have a couple of presenters that found the technology a little bit challenging on the day. But nevertheless, we did get through the event. We didn't lose a single presenter. We even ended up gaining a presenter who had gone back to Poland to look after her ill parents and couldn't get back into Australia. So we thought we were going to lose her from the program. And when we went virtual, we were able to get her back involved again. So she streamed live from Poland. And generally, the feedback we got was overwhelmingly positive, particularly from our keynote speakers. I've never had keynotes before that make such a proclamation of how well we did in the middle of their keynote presentation and explaining to people what we'd achieved by turning this event from face-to-face to virtual in such a short period of time. So it was a really positive experience. The feedback we got was that they've changed their mind about virtual events, and that's a really positive thing for everybody.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's a pretty widespread fear a lot of people have around virtual events. A lot of people hear virtual events and, they think Zoom. And I think early on in the piece back in 2020, that was often the case. And a lot of people did get burnt, spending a lot of money on a ticket to a virtual event and then, it just being a glorified Zoom. And I think attendees expect a lot more than that now. So it's fantastic to hear the feedback from your speakers and your attendees. And it's really interesting that you're able to pick up speakers and pick up attendees by going virtual. So you talked there about it was a purely in-person event and you had the attendee app all ready to go through in person, and that made it quite easy to shift to a purely virtual event.
Correct.
Yeah, fantastic, because you already had the agenda and everything set up there. So
everything was already set up. We always use the delegate app, the attendee app, for all of our face-to-face events. We have for the last couple of years. So we were ready to go. It was just reconfirming with everybody. It was the logistics. It was the grind, if you like, of having to get everyone virtually ready.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one of the big things with hybrid is, we talk a lot about the opportunities and the additional attendees you can reach by offering a virtual component. But I think one of the core things it does just gives you an insurance policy, and having a platform that's ready to switch to virtual really, really quickly is an incredibly important part, as has been evidenced in the event that you ran. So just talk us through, I guess, logistically, without going into too much depth, what that journey looked like. You talked about briefing speakers, briefing your attendees. How did you get that message out to your attendees and your speakers primarily?
Well, we had a little bit of a complication, which was the timing was awful. But the Department of Education server in New South Wales was hacked. So this happened a couple of days after we went into lockdown, before we were starting the virtual event. So about 80% of our delegates couldn't actually get access to their login information.
Wow.
So what we did, well, first off, in the very early stages, we immediately sent out comms through EventsAIR to inform everybody about what was happening. We had previously thought about going hybrid, and this was literally 2 days before we got indications that we were getting close to going into lockdown. So we'd already gone out to a lot of delegates and asked them whether or not they wanted to transfer to a virtual environment. This was around the time that the capacities had changed at the ICC, and we were looking for people to opt out of face-to-face. So we'd already started that process about 2 days before we made the decision to go totally virtual. We had set up an interactive site to get people's responses as to whether or not they wanted to transfer or not. So a good amount of communication. People already knew that we were going down that path. So then when we finally went out and told them it was totally virtual, one of our operations team focused on delegates, the other focused on the speakers. We set up an interactive site for speakers' session rehearsal times, which we had done with a previous event. And we'd actually done another event the previous week, which was about 300 speakers, and that's a whole other story in itself. But we had developed an interactive site for that particular event for people to book in their session times for rehearsal. So we had that, and we could translate that fairly quickly to this other event. And then basically we started rehearsing. We had one of our team pull the OnAIR portal together fairly quickly, because as I said, we had a lot of the structure already in place, and we pretty much started rehearsing the Friday within a week, and then we ran rehearsals right through the following week. We wrote the script for our MC, because he had been our MC for many years and was really used to MCing in a face-to-face environment, but what he had to learn in such a short space of time wasn't realistic. So we did a couple of virtual rehearsals with him, and then we wrote his script, and that just helped him not forget any of the important parts, like check the banner, make sure that you check out the meeting hub, all of those normal housekeeping tasks. And then on the day, we had planned to have everyone in our office at the same time, but because of the lockdown, one of our team members doesn't live in the Greater Sydney area. So she was actually at the airport ready to get on a flight to come to Sydney, and I had to ring her and say, "Don't come, we're going into lockdown." So she actually ran live support from Byron Bay, and the rest of us worked out of the office. We had enough technology in there. We had 8 people working from our team on this event, running on 22 monitors across the 3 days of the event, and with our live support coming live from Byron Bay.
Great. And your client, obviously, there was still, when you were planning this event, there was the risk of lockdowns happening, and your client decided to push ahead with an in-person event, which obviously didn't end up taking place. Can you talk us through that and the conversations you had with your client around virtual, hybrid, and in-person, and what you could do there?
This particular event we've been doing for about 13 years, and it's grown from being a 200-person event to being the 1,400 people that we've had over the last couple of years. And because of the particular sector of in education, it is very important for them to be face-to-face. It's almost like just a moment of peace for them to be out of the school and to be able to network. So there was never any question of going virtual until the week before we actually did it. And the client was very determined that this was going to be a face-to-face event. Even when we had some states closing their borders, and their delegates were saying that they could no longer come into New South Wales, because the majority of our delegates came from New South Wales, the client was still steadfast that they were going to go face-to-face. So there wasn't a lot of conversations about going hybrid. It was literally, we've got a problem, and this is where we think we're going, and we need to be risk averse. And it was the financial risk of the event that eventually convinced the client to first go hybrid, and then immediately after that, or 2 days after, go virtual. I think it's a very different scenario when you're talking about an event that's going to be in 12 months' time, where you're talking about all the pros and cons. We didn't have that luxury in this particular instance. It was just, this is what needs to be done, and this is what we're going to do.
Yeah, and I think there's elements at a physical, in-person, face-to-face event that you're never going to replicate online. Even the best virtual event technology on the planet just can't replicate that experience of being on site. But a lot of our customers are really starting to plan for that hybrid first strategy, that digital first strategy for exactly these kind of scenarios. And it sounds like you and your team are in a really good place for that, because you actually have the skills and the training with EventsAIR and OnAIR to be able to spin these things up really, really quickly without spending tens of thousands of dollars, and without spending weeks and weeks and weeks doing it. You're actually able to just really quickly, and apologize for using this overused term, pivot really quickly and pivot the event as well. So yeah.
But I do think there are some challenges, and I think that there are some misnomers that this is a cost-effective solution to get access to more delegates, when I think that anyone's actually costed out hybrid in relation to the audio-visual requirements that you need, camera operators, extra manpower, and getting a client to understand that we're effectively running two separate events at the same time is challenging as well. So I think as a PCO, we have to be very clear with our clients what costs are involved, what risks are involved, but also what the benefits are. And we've spent the last 12 months selling the benefits of a virtual event. And obviously the main benefit is you no longer have to choose what you see. You can see everything. And it's going to be very difficult when we go back to face to take that away from people, because they're going to become very used to it. That's part of their value proposition now of actually coming to an event. It's access to content. So that monetizing that potentially post-event is something that we're talking about with clients, but we haven't actually worked out what's the best way of doing that, because it's really very much a case of changing the culture of organizations putting on events, and that's going to be the challenge.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, the concept of monetizing that content moving forward, because with a virtual event, obviously everything's recorded by default and then available on demand. And really early on, back in March, April, May of last year, the events industry went through almost like a little microcosm of what the music industry and what the newspaper industry went through, where it was online, it was expected to be free. And very quickly, event planners were able to actually demonstrate value through their content and say, well, no, you have to pay for this content. It's online, but you have to pay for it. And we're going to make sure it's really good value for you. And it's really interesting to hear that now that's shifted a little bit further. So we're actually starting to see post-event, when the event's all over, the ability to, or the potential for the ability to actually drive more revenue. And a lot of customers are actually talking about that, which is fantastic, because it used to be with a good old-fashioned in-person event, your revenue stops when registrations close, usually a few days before the event, whereas now it can actually be a recurring revenue model based on the quality of the content that you're providing. And that's a massive shift in the events industry, I think. So interesting.
Something that we have been able to do, and you just mentioned it, you used to shut registration down a couple of days before the event. Now you don't need to cut registration off until literally the day before the event ends. And we've had a lot of pickup in registrations when the event is actually running for day delegate rates going forward. So it's changing what we do and how we think about running these events.
Yeah, and it comes down to that I want it now sort of expectation with anything online nowadays as well with your attendees. We've definitely seen that. The data bears that out with our customers' events, where registrations tend to spike right in those last days before the event, as the marketing kind of ramps up, but also as people realize, oh, this thing's here, it's just around the corner, I'm going to register for it. Whereas the graph of registrations at an in-person event is a very different beast to virtual. So
the one thing that I will say is that if it hadn't have been, and you don't know I'm about to say this, if it hadn't have been for the EventsAIR platform, if it hadn't have been for OnAIR, if it hadn't been for Aircast, I wouldn't be in business. It's as simple as that. So what your team provided your clients, and me as one of them, the training, the time, the ability to beta test, all of those tools that we got have kept us alive, have kept my doors open. And it's been a journey that I never want to go on again. And if in March last year they had have said that in 15 months' time we would still be doing virtual events. We would still not be going face to face. I don't know whether I would have had the courage to keep going, but we did, and it is what it is. And the on-air product has just been so valuable to us. And what I love is that it's being updated on a regular basis. You really take on board what your customers have to say. And the 3D version of on-air is just so wonderful. It's really brought us back to a great exhibition again.
Yeah, it's fantastic to hear you say that. And, I think on the flip side of that as well, we've been so thankful to have an incredible group of customers like yourself who have been willing to work with us and go on this journey with us. We couldn't have gone to market so quickly, and we couldn't have created the incredible product we did without the valuable input and feedback and support from a fantastic group of customers. So hats off to you and your team for your incredible work over the last 18 months in making sure this event in making sure the industry stayed on its feet and kept rolling, and we're able to keep running events. And fingers crossed we'll be getting back to in-person soon, and hybrid's going to be a big part of that. So listen, I apologize to everyone, we didn't have time to get through the questions. There's been some fantastic questions coming through in the Q&A. What we will do is we'll sit down with Julie after the session today, get some feedback to those questions, and we'll communicate them out to all attendees after the event, so that you can get some feedback on those questions that I'm sure you'll be keen to hear from Julie's input on. Julie, I'd like to say a big thank you for joining us today. I hope it was really useful to all of our attendees, but I absolutely had a pleasure chatting with you about it today. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Tom.
No worries at all. All right. Thanks a lot, Julie. So everyone, that's it for this session.